Okay, welcome back, everybody. Thanks again for joining us. Third session of the day, AIDC 22. We have another great session ready for you. Doug Harriman is here to share with us. Let's see, let me read the session title specifically, Achieving Optimal Accessibility in Storyline and Other Learning Environments. Doug also has a checklist that he'll be sharing in the chat area for you to look over. I also actually put that checklist. It's linked on the AIDC website, and I did also put it in the description of the session in AirMeet. So if you want to go back and reference that checklist, there it is. You can get to it. So with that, Doug, I'm going to go ahead and let you take over. I wouldn't mind if you did an intro about yourself. I didn't have that much information on your bio. I know that you're an instructional and web designer and that you're actually near me in Northern California and all that. So if you can give us a little intro and to start out, and I'm going to go ahead and hide myself.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Douglas Harriman. I am an instructional and web designer, and I guess you could say all-around accessibility advocate with the University of California Office of the President. In this session, I'm going to be sharing with you our UC's eCourse accessibility checklist. It is a publicly available resource that you can use to guide your own accessible eCourse development efforts, regardless of what authoring or development programs you're using. But it also contains a ton of storyline-specific guidance that I'm going to be sharing with you out through the bulk of this session. So like Louise mentioned, I'm going to get things rolling with just a quick introduction. There you go. Storyline and I first got acquainted with each other when we were both little babies. I was just starting the second year of my instructional design career, working for a company that had been using Articulate Presenter, which I kind of think of as a Storyline predecessor. And because of that, we got access to the beta version of Storyline 1, and I've been using it ever since. In 2013, I joined UC by way of UC Berkeley. And while there, I had the extreme privilege of getting to spend a lot of time with the UC Berkeley Office of Web Access. It is one of the premier accessibility units within the UC system, just a fantastic team of accessibility professionals led by Lucy Greco, who is one of, if not the leading expert in accessibility at UC, and who has for many years, actually just until very recently, been the chair of our system-wide electronic accessibility committee that brings together some of the top accessibility folks from each UC location to tackle big picture accessibility issues. And while I've been working with the committee on a number of training resources and events over the years, I'm really honored to say that I was recently nominated to be one of my location's representatives on that committee. But back to Berkeley, while there, I got to spend a ton of time sitting in with the web access team as they tested many an e-learning tool and platform, learning from them what standards they were looking for in these products, their expectations, what constituted a failure, and in some cases, like a critical failure. Learned a few screen readers as well as how to keyboard navigate, and specifically got to spend a ton of time with them looking at eCourses and Storyline outputs, exploring what we needed to do to make them minimally accessible, as well as what we could do to make them maximally accessible. Well, in 2016, I migrated to the UC Office of the President. If you're unfamiliar with us, we're kind of like a central hub of sorts for the UC system, connecting all of the locations together. And due in part to that hub positionality, as well as my relationship with Lucy and her team, and my membership in our local accessibility affinity group, I began hearing around 2017, 2018 that fellow instructional designers and eCourse developers throughout the UC system, I'd say most of whom are Storyline users like myself, though we do have a fair number of Captivate users. Well, these folks were looking for guidance on how to make their eCourses accessible. That was increasingly becoming an expectation, but we didn't have any resources at the time specifically speaking to that medium. So in my free time, I began taking all of the eCourse accessibility knowledge I gathered from Lucy and her team over the years, as well as everything that I had learned from my own experiences using Storyline and building accessible products with it. And I began compiling all of it into this, the earliest version of the Creating Accessible eCourses, eCourse and Storyline checklist. Now this document, this version of it is still available. It's linked in the current version of the checklist that we've shared, but it has been retired for the most part. Pretty much all of the information in it that remains applicable has been ported over into the new version. And you're probably only going to find this useful either for reference purposes or somehow, for some reason, you are still working in a pre-accessible player of Storyline 3, which is what this is written to. Few notes on early Storyline accessibility. Not everything worked as expected back in the day, and I don't even mean that as an insult. I think Articulate would have been the first folks to tell you that, if for no other reason than the screen reader behavior was pretty unique. This was before Storyline could accommodate semantic programming, and all you could pretty much do is read forward and backward and engage with objects that had triggers. Also, there were a fair number of bugs related to the accessibility functionality, so a lot of the Storyline how-to coverage in the earliest versions of the checklist was just describing bugs and detailing workarounds to account for them. And not every version was necessarily a step forward. There was a few steps forward, but then one or two steps back on occasion with some new feature or update introducing some new accessibility irregularity. So I think all that is worth knowing just for the history or legacy there. I mean, actually, let me jump back for a second. Storyline has gotten a ton better in all of these regards. But again, there is a little bit of a legacy here. These facts certainly influence the habits that I've formed in Storyline. They influence the checklist, and we still even now have this bugs section that has thankfully gotten smaller and smaller over the years. But we'll still recommend, test after installing an update just to make sure all of the accessibility features and functionality are still working as you've come to expect. That all being said, I still thought then, I still feel now, Storyline is capable of producing pretty darn accessible outputs. It was superior at the time and continues to be superior accessibility-wise to any alternative that I've experimented with in the marketplace, though it has been a few years since I've done like a Captivate or Lectora deep dive, to be honest. But I think we all recognize back in the day there was still a lot of room for growth. And in fact, Articulate recognized that first and foremost. And in 2019, they got in contact with Lucy Greco and I and let us know that they were rebuilding Storyline from the ground up with a specific focus on accessibility programming. So we shared the checklist with them as well as a wish list of what we would like to see accessibility-wise in a new version of Storyline. They invited me, as well as actually a few of the other folks speaking at this conference, to be part of a testing team for them, looking at the earliest version of the new Storyline beta, and just reporting issues with them, discussing what we'd like to see, and continuing to do that through the first year of its release. So that new version of Storyline was released in 2020. It is called the Accessible Player and was mapped onto Storyline 360, which had actually been out for a little while at that point, as well as mapped onto Storyline 3. So eventually I found a little bit more free time and have updated the checklist. It is now called the Updated eCourse Accessibility Checklist. It speaks specifically to the accessible player. And as you might be able to peek down there at the bottom, I did just push out another update in advance of this session. So the checklist is divided into two primary sections, the first of which has all of our eCourse accessibility standards. Per checklist user request, we've laid it out like you see here, where we've got standards in brief in the left column, and then more detailed explanations of what we're aiming for with the standard in the right column. And we've subdivided these standards into 4 sections. So there is the general accessibility section with stuff that's pertinent to pretty much any digital environment. Then there is the eCourse general accessibility section. There is the eCourse interactivity and navigation section, and the eCourse multimedia integration section, dealing with issues pertaining to audio, video, graphics, animations, and the like. So again, that first half of the guide, all of those standards are intended to be applicable regardless of what authoring or development program you're using. So hopefully everybody will find that stuff useful. But the second half of the guide is all Storyline specific. So we've got the noted Storyline features that impact accessibility. That's some of the higher level accessibility stuff within Storyline. A lot of the same information I'm going to be sharing with you today. We've got a few Storyline specific notes scattered throughout the footnotes in the first half of the guide, though pretty much all of that information is repeated in the Storyline specific section. And we've got the Storyline technique section. This is more detailed, step-by-step how-to guides for at least my methods for implementing and achieving some of the standards spoken to in the checklist. One of the things that you're going to note going through the checklist is that we really strove with our standards to speak to the best possible assistive technology user experience. Folks very frequently ask me, will this checklist help me achieve WCAG or Section 508 standards? Yes, it will, absolutely. But in a few respects, those standards speak to minimally accessible experiences, and we really strove for the optimal instead in a certain respect. So to give you a few examples of that, WCAG guidelines, they have this criterion 1.4.2 audio control. It talks about how autoplaying media presents a difficulty for screen reader users. As a screen reader user, when you go into a new environment, like a new slide, you're probably going to be feeling around with your screen reader, trying to get a lay of the land. You might even have some content auto-read to you. And if you've got screen reader output going on at the same time as some autoplaying media, you're going to have two channels of audio conflicting with each other, probably confusing and frustrating you. So this WCAG criterion says, at minimum, you need to provide a way to pause or stop the autoplaying media. And we absolutely agree with that and would advocate for you providing those means as well. But we look at a situation like that and we think to ourselves, why put screen reader users in that difficult position to begin with? Why not just have the standard be, don't have autoplaying media? And I don't want to knock the WCAG standard here. Actually, if you dig into it, it makes the same exact suggestion. But again, as far as putting the optimal experience at the forefront of our standards instead of just the minimal, for us in our standards, we led with just don't have autoplaying media in the first place. So in my slides, you'll see that by default, they open with this play button that you've got to click to hear the audio. In case you're interested, I facilitate that with a layer that pops up as soon as the slide transcript starts. That layer has the pause timeline of the base layer slide property so that the baseline timeline pauses before the audio begins playing. You click the play button, it hides that layer, disables that pause setting, and then the audio will begin playing. But don't worry, all of that is covered in detail in the storyline techniques section. So some of the ways in which our standards put assistive technology users first create situations that may not be ideal for other users. As in, it's probably already occurred to you that most users, actually myself included, are going to prefer to have their slides autoplay as soon as they navigate to them. They're not going to want to have to click a play button in each and every slide. And I absolutely respect that and want to accommodate that. That's a pretty big part of the user experience. We do, however, have this fundamental accessibility principle that we think that courses' default states should be their most accessible state. So while we do want our courses to start with this manual play setting by default, you absolutely can, and we absolutely endorse the idea of providing an autoplay option, or at least that would be the equivalent with this setting. It's a setting within the course that users can enable that would allow slides to start automatically. So you'll see in my course, I've got this autoplay button. You can toggle it on. It's going to prevent that manual play layer from popping up. And again, that is detailed in full in the storyline techniques section. And there are lots of ways you can do similar things within your courses. If you've got like a default state that is more accessible, but maybe not as catered to everybody else's wishes, then you can just provide a setting within the course that will maybe toggle things over from that default more accessible state to a less accessible state that is, maybe more in tune with what other people are wanting. Other ways in which we put assistive technology users first with our standards may not be ideal for you, the storyline developer, as in some of our recommendations are going to take a little bit more development time to implement. So a classic example of that borrows a classic storyline developer technique, putting the slide transcript in the notes panel. It's something I imagine we have all done at one point. If for no other reason, then it is super easy. You just copy your script, you paste it into the notes panel, and boom, you have checked off that minimum accessibility standard of providing a transcript to accompany your audio. The problem with that, however, it is not ideal for all assistive technology users, particularly for keyboard users. For somebody that's just navigating an environment using their keyboard, it's going to take them in a slide like this, which is a pretty basic informational slide with only a few interactive elements within it. We're talking 14 key presses for somebody to access and begin reading the transcript in that notes panel. And in a more interactive slide, and forgive me for not putting 25 labels in here, but the paintings are buttons, you've got those magnifying glass buttons. It would take somebody 25 key presses to reach the transcript in the notes panel in this sort of slide. And that's just not ideal for an assistive technology user to have to do something 14 to 25 times in every single slide, especially when you consider that a lot of folks who are keyboard navigators are using their keyboard instead of their mouse because they've got some, impairment or disability that makes using a mouse painful. And if you're making them do some repetitive action 14 to 25 times in every single slide, you are very likely to aggravate the same thing that is causing them to use a keyboard in the first place. So in our standards, we suggest instead that you have transcripts available in the slides themselves and available very early in each slide's focus order. So I've got my transcripts in a pop-up layer, and the button that opens that layer is typically the second thing that assistive technology users will encounter in each slide. I also have a key press trigger that you can use to just open that transcript layer regardless of where you are in the slide's focus order. So something like that does take a little bit more time to set up, but thankfully there are tons of ways in which you can take advantage of Storyline's robust copy and paste features to just save time when implementing these accessibility features. So for instance, I will often just set up that transcript in one slide, copy and paste it into all the other slides within my course, or there's a lot of accessibility oriented stuff that I'll just set up once in one course, and then I'll just copy and paste it into other courses. As I'm sure a lot of you will know, in Storyline, you can copy layers and all of their objects and triggers. You can copy objects and all of their triggers. One of the most frequent things I'll do in Storyline is just copy a ton of triggers at once, paste them somewhere else, and then maybe just adjust some of the object and variable references. So to get a little deeper into the accessibility specifics within Storyline, probably the most important accessibility feature is the accessibility settings. These are accessed through the size and position panel. If you don't already know the quick key command for bringing that up, Control-Shift-Enter, it will save you a ton of time and having to move back and forth between your mouse and keyboard. The settings themselves, they are object is visible to accessibility tools. So if that is clicked or assigned for an object, let's see, assistive technologies will be able to encounter, read, and engage with that object. And if that setting is not checked, then they will not. So for decorative or duplicative content, stuff that you don't want assistive technology users to have to waste their time encountering, you would uncheck that setting. And as I note here, that's especially important for anything built in Storyline, any of the built-in templates. In most cases, they do not have their decorative content hidden from accessibility tools. A few other things worth knowing about these settings: you can have different settings for different states. So you could have one alt text string, and I'm sorry, I forgot to mention alt text. Obviously, alternate text, that's the other accessibility setting in that panel. That is text that you can assign to objects that screen readers will read when they encounter the object. So anyways, different accessibility settings for different states. You can have a different alt text string for maybe the object's normal state and a different alt text string for some custom state. You could have the object visible to accessibility tools in one state and maybe hidden from them in another. And you can also have different settings for groups and the individual objects within them, including those object states. So both of these are good to know in that they will help you craft the exact assistive technology user experience that you want, but they are equally worth knowing because they are behind many an accessibility irregularity found during testing, where maybe you thought you hid some object from accessibility tools, and it turns out you did hide it in one of its states, but you're currently encountering it in some other state that the object was not hidden in. One other thing I wanted to note in relation to these settings, in my last big build a couple months ago, I did notice this quirk, and I don't know why it was happening, but text boxes were appearing in my focus panel having alt text. Also, if you look at the bottom screenshot there, when I opened those objects in the size and position panel, I would also see that they had alternate text there. The text was black and not the default gray that you get when a text box text is being read, and you'll see it kind of in gray in the alt text field. So the issue here was that objects exhibiting this behavior, my screen reader was reading the alt text. It was not reading the text itself along with their semantic programming, which made it difficult for screen reader users to do equivalent interpretation to what a visual user is going to see. So to fix something like that, if you do note the same behavior in your focus panel, all you have to do is just go into the accessibility settings and delete the alt text, and it will revert to having screen readers read the text itself within the text box along with its semantic programming. All right, the other big accessibility feature in Storyline is the focus order panel. This is accessed through the home ribbon, and it is what dictates reading and tab order in Storyline. So per our standard that you should sequence content in the order that best facilitates understanding and engagement, this is what you would use for that. And personally, I find that I almost always have to use a custom focus order to achieve that ideal reading order. Just figured that was worth noting. And right now, just so you know, you cannot include player controls in the focus order panel, but that is one of my few big remaining accessibility wishes for Storyline, as it would just give us even more control over crafting the ideal assistive technology user experience. Another setting, or in this case, a slide layer property pertinent to the focus order and reading order within a slide is the prevent the user from clicking on layer property. It used to be called prevent the user from clicking on the base layer, but with the most recent updates that they pushed out for Storyline 360 at least, it is now called prevent the user from clicking on other layers. True to that name, when a layer with this property assigned to it is open, assistive technology users will not be able to interact with or read and encounter any objects in any other layers, regardless of their accessibility settings. So this is really useful in situations where you really want to limit assistive technology focus to just the objects in your layer. Maybe having objects in other layers be visible to accessibility tools in that moment would create just kind of an overwhelming situation where there'd be too much information. Maybe folks would get lost in the focus order and not be able to find the content that you want them really focusing on in that exact moment. So use that setting in those situations. And also really worth knowing, because when a layer with this setting assigned to it opens, focus is automatically going to be sent to the object within that layer that is highest within the slide's focus order. So it is one of the few ways that we have of controlling where focus order goes while a user is interacting with the slide. Also, these days, pretty much every screen reader I've tested with is going to auto read that first element, which is really nice for screen reader users. Something that Articulate and Storyline are still struggling with in regards to accessibility and the reading order is the focus landing spot when you hide a layer can sometimes be wrong and unpredictable. So I most frequently encounter this with those transcript layers I mentioned a moment ago, where they have a button within them that you use to close the slide transcript, or it hides the layer. There's also a quick key shortcut for that I program into my slides. And often when you close a layer, focus does not go to the base layer object above the close button in the focus order. It doesn't go to the base layer object below it. Often it goes completely outside of the focus order to like the return to top button or the player controls. It's annoying, and unfortunately it's also unpredictable, so we can't even tell folks, oh, focus is going to go 2 spots lower than it should. So Articulate is aware of this. They are working on fixing it. In the meantime, my other big accessibility wish, give us a set focus trigger action where we can tell focus specifically where to go when a certain event occurs. That would allow us to address this issue and would just be super powerful in a ton of other regards. But in the meantime, how can you address something like this? Well, you could program landmarks, and I put that in quotes because you can't actually program ARIA landmarks at this point, but you could do something like programming the slide title as a heading. And I say heading 2 because if you have the course name present in the course player, that's automatically going to be programmed as a heading 1. So if that's a heading 1, just, probably the appropriate heading level for slide titles within your heading hierarchy would probably be a heading 2. And the reason I suggest this is because slide titles are usually at a consistent spot in each slide's focus order, or at least they should be. And so you've provided a way for screen reader users to use a single command, their jump to previous heading command, to go from an unknown spot in the slide's focus order, at least to one spot within the focus order that they're familiar with. They can kind of get their bearings and go from there. Another way you could address this is just mention it in your instructions. Folks will still encounter the issue, but at least then when they do, they'll know what's going on. They'll be less confused by it, and they can kind of plan a strategy for dealing with it. Speaking of instructions, we recommend providing them early and often. So early, if it's a Storyline course that you're publishing to the LMS or to the web, you can include the accessibility instructions in that description field within the publish panel. That way, assistive technology users have an opportunity to read instructions pertinent to them before they even open the course. And then as far as providing those instructions often, we suggest that you have accessibility instructions available for users from any slide or anywhere within the course. So the way I facilitate that is with these A and I buttons that I include in all of my slides. The A button will take you to our accessibility instructions slide that has all of our screen reader user and keyboard user guidance. And the I button will take you to our additional instruction slide, which amongst other things has all of the keyboard shortcuts you can use to move through the course more quickly. I also have key press triggers that I create and copy and paste into all the slides within my course. And those two instruction slides, they have this return button with the jump to previous slide trigger so that folks can click that button and just jump back to whatever slide they had been on before they sought out the instructions. And then also, if there are certain situations that you want to make folks aware of in a specific slide, I've had folks say, I've got this interaction within my slide. I don't know if screen reader users are going to quite understand it. You can totally have just, specific instructions within individual slides themselves, just to make sure that folks understand what you intend for them to do. Speaking of keyboard and key press shortcuts, which I've mentioned a few times, we recommend providing them for any common in-course action. They just help everybody move through the course more quickly. So thankfully, Storyline does provide a bunch of built-in keyboard shortcuts now, tackling most of the common in-course actions like jumping to the next and previous slide, playing and pausing a slide, etc. I still add additional key press shortcuts for opening transcript layers and closing them, and also, again, for jumping to those instruction slides. I also recommend that you use Control and Alt in any of your key press trigger combos. Control and Alt allows you to bypass this toggle switch that screen readers have, where they've got one mode that allows them to navigate with their screen reader and read things. And if they want to use the keys in another program, like typing in a word processing program or using another program's keyboard shortcuts, they have to toggle their screen reader out of the screen reader mode into this other mode. They'll work in that machine, maybe they'll use your Storyline key press trigger, and then they have to toggle back to keep reading things with their screen reader. It's pretty annoying if you have to toggle some switch twice just to use a key press trigger. So again, I recommend getting around that by using Control and Alt in your key press combos, and screen readers can use those regardless of what mode they are in. You can override the built-in keyboard shortcuts, although I recommend against it. It would be confusing because you cannot override this instructions. And this screenshot here is actually from the keyboard shortcut pane that you can bring up by hitting Shift ? From any slide. And, it would be kind of weird if you program Control Alt comma to jump you to, say, the next slide instead of the previous slide. But then users can still bring up this instructions list here, and it's telling them that Control Alt comma takes you to the previous slide. You can, however, which I don't discourage, you can add additional trigger actions to each of those built-in keyboard shortcuts. So you could have, Control Alt R adjust a variable in addition to replaying a slide. As far as replaying slides, we have another standard that users should be able to easily restart slides and pop-ups from their beginning. The simplest way I found of executing that is just have layers and slides set to, when revisiting, reset to initial state. I recommend against leaving it in that automatically decide setting, even if it is giving you the behavior that you want. It can be a little unpredictable. But if you do need to kind of maintain saved states and slides, like show that something's been engaged with, or maybe something's been toggled, you can totally easily use variables and conditional triggers to kind of achieve that same behavior. All right, headings. Now that Storyline can accommodate semantic programming, you can program headings using the textile menu. One thing I wanted to note about that, just beware of using Shift and Enter within your headings. In other programs like Word, you can use Shift and Enter within a heading to push some words to the next line of text, achieve the exact layout or look that you want for your heading. And it's still going to recognize that as a single heading. In Storyline, however, if you use Shift Enter, at least at the moment, it's going to separate that into two separately recognized elements. So two separately recognized headings, which you don't really want. So if you do want to, push certain words to the next line of text, use text box width or internal margins instead. Or what I most frequently do is I will take that space that is before some word that I want to push to the next line of text, I'll open up the font settings. Well, I'll highlight the space, open up the font settings, and use expanded character spacing, whatever value is necessary down there to get that space large enough to push the word to the next line of text. All right, programming links. There is currently only one way to program links that will allow them to be semantically recognized as links. So screen reader users can use their jump to next link command, or the link will appear in the list of links that screen readers can bring up. And that one method is to have some text in a text box or a shape, highlight it, and use the insert hyperlink feature, or Control K is the quick key command for that. Pretty much any object that has a user clicks trigger assigned to it, even if it is an open URL trigger, which is the same trigger that hyperlinks use, anything like that is going to be semantically recognized as a button. So I know, just saw somebody say in the chat, so many tips. Don't worry, this is all in that checklist document for you to just peruse at your own leisure. But what I like to do is anything in my courses that is going externally, like going to a web page or downloading something, I will try to program those as links, since it's a little more what screen reader users are used to. And then anything that is executing an in-course action, like opening a layer or jumping you to another slide, I will have those semantically programmed as buttons, just that consistent experience and what a certain element type is used versus what it is, what it's doing. Consistency in that regard is going to help screen reader users. Testing, another thing we recommend doing early and often. So as you know, so much of Storyline is just setting up something in one slide, like my transcript layers, copy and pasting them into other slides. Well, just make sure that you accessibility test that first instance before replicating it throughout your course. As I'm sure all of you know, Storyline development gets particularly time-consuming and frustrating when you're having to make the same tiny tweak or fix in a bunch of different slides. Another legacy or history thing just to be aware of, we used to see pretty different testing results depending on our testing environment. So you'd get one accessibility testing result testing in the in-Storyline preview. You'd get something else if you were locally viewing a Storyline output, and then you'd get some third behavior, closest to what end users experience when you uploaded the output to an LMS or a server and tested it there. I haven't seen those differences nearly as much recently. Pretty much the only thing I see is that it's a struggle sometimes to get my screen reader to work within the in-Storyline preview, but I do think that this is worth knowing in case you ever encounter anything like that. And I still do kind of encourage testing in whatever environment is closest to what your end users will experience. Last note on screen readers and browsers, Articulate used to say that only JAWS was compatible with Storyline outputs. That wasn't really true back then. NVDA worked well enough, but now it's not the case at all. You can pretty much use any screen reader. Although I will say I still encounter some minor differences with NVDA. Like recently, I found a tiny bug. Actually, I saw somebody talk about the layers versus dialogue setting for layers that they just introduced with the last update. I saw a little bug with NVDA with that I did not experience with JAWS. So, if I had to recommend recommend a screen reader, I would recommend JAWS. However, because of the price point and just the market share that NVDA enjoys, including amongst UC screen reader users, I still like to kind of test with NVDA and design to it, just in case there is some little NVDA bug. I might be able to find it and fix it before end users see it. And then another history or legacy note here, Firefox, there have been very, very brief periods in the past, just a version or two, in which screen readers could not read Storyline outputs within Firefox. It is not something I have seen recently or expect to ever see again, but I do think it's worth knowing and kind of highlights some of the reasons why it's worth doing at least a little bit of testing in each major browser just to ensure there aren't any critical issues like that. All right, well, I'm going to wrap things up there for now, and hopefully we saved enough time for questions and maybe finally catch up on that chat pane. Let's see, is there... All right, so I just... Oh.
Well, Doug, I was just going to say, I'm only seeing one question, although chat has been absolutely crazy. Like, there's been so much information. Like, there's like almost this secondary session that's happening. It's been incredible, aside from everything that you've been talking about. But let's try with this question, if it's okay. I'll just show it on the stage. when adding in accessibility, how much additional time do you allow versus not having accessibility in a course?
So the readily quantified answer to that question that I have is that I found that at least when I was first learning to integrate accessibility with my storyline practices, and this was back in the day of Storyline 3, when there was more bugs that you had to work around for. Back then, I would say as much as a third of development time was solely implementing accessibility features and testing them. That time got significantly reduced as I learned things better and just had more, again, of kind of templated interactions that I could copy and paste course to course or slide to slide. So I could get that down to about a quarter. But I'd still say it's probably around there, maybe a quarter to a fifth of the development time for me and my courses is just doing accessibility work. But again, much like accessibility in other programs, a lot of it does just get to be second nature where, as soon as you add a decorative shape to a slide, like the very first thing you're doing, just like some involuntary response is just opening up the accessibility settings and hiding it from accessibility tools.
No, that's great. Thank you. Let's see here. Got another one. This one's from Callie. Do you have experience adding closed captioning in Storyline with live narration?
I do not, no. I will say, as far as closed captions, we do in the storyline technique section have a method in there for doing custom captions, just in case you need your captions to be even more accessible than the built-in caption functionality. That built-in functionality is currently not detectable by screen readers. So if you've got captions providing a foreign language subtitle, screen reader users are not going to be able to read those. So there is a kind of another method you could have for having screen reader accessible captions within your slides. And it actually gives you a ton more control over how captions appear. Less useful now that they've built more of those controls into the course player, but you still might want to check that out. It's a cool technique. But unfortunately, I don't have a lot of experience with live narration.
Okay.
That sounds like something that I would probably go to YouTube for. And these days, YouTube's got the best auto captioning, at least, word recognition algorithm that I've seen.
Okay. Let's see, this one from Lauren. Are there any tools online you can use to test as a screen reader would?
Actually, in this regard, I would say just use a screen reader. NVDA is free. And as I say in the checklist, in my opinion, just, reading forward and reading backward and the control to, in NVDA and JAWS, it's the insert key and up arrow. It's going to tell you or read to you what focus is presently on. And those are pretty easy things to learn. And I found that is enough to test like 95% of things in screen readers, just to make sure your focus order is correct, that your alt text is correct for a given state. And I mean, it's not too much more difficult to spring from there to, figuring out some of the quick key commands like jump to next heading or the next link, bring up the elements list that will show you all the links or headings in a slide. But, instructional designers, we're such a smart lot where we're just, learning new things, teaching ourselves things is a huge part of the job. And I personally feel like screen readers are simple enough that most of us can figure it out. And again, NVDA is free. JAWS, there is a free demo. It's a little bit annoying having to restart your computer in order to use it, but I think you find ways to integrate that into your workflow.
Great. Doug, have you done this session before anywhere? Just because I'm like, this the recording for this needs to be shared. Like,
no, I actually have not.
Really? Okay.
I mean, I've shared the checklist before, but like I shared it at DevLearn the first year we did it. Just because my folks, we didn't have funds to send me to DevLearn otherwise that year, but
right.
That was more sharing, the checklist itself, and I wanted to get a little more into the accessibility specifics with folks here. Hopefully, I did not overwhelm you, but thank goodness this is recorded.
Well, no, I think you did overwhelm me, but yeah, it was worth it. I'm going to go back and definitely review again. It was just absolutely fantastic, and the chat is so good. I'm going to see if I can export all of that and have that as a separate document for folks to be able to look at, because I know like Lisa Spurko and just other folks that were in the chat were just posting some really incredible stuff. So Doug, thank you for this. Oops, let's see. There might be
Yeah, I
another.
don't know. Like, if we have any extra time, I did prepare some things if there wasn't enough in questions. Should I breeze through these if we have a few more minutes?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. 5 more minutes. So
All
feel
right,
free to
great.
go for
Okay,
it.
so be consistent. Consistency is one of the best things you can do to create an accessible environment for folks. Just the more that they can come to know what to expect and not have to deal with confusion or just figuring things out on their own, it's super helpful. So be consistent with stuff like the focus order. I also recommend it with your alt text, like verbs that execute certain actions. Be consistent in what verbs you use. So jump to, if you encounter that, it's always going to be taking you to another slide, or at least in my courses. Whereas open or explore, that's always going to be bringing up a new layer. Personally, I use a ton of custom states. The built-in states were one of those features that had some accessibility bugs back in the day. And I still actually recently saw something with the selected state where it was like changing alt text in the different states without me doing that. And I eventually got it figured out, and it wasn't really something that would have impacted end users, but I don't know, it made me feel like I'm not ready to get out of my habit of using custom states. So I have a lot of buttons, like you see that trigger list there, where you click on a button, it will put the button into its normal state, depending if a true-false variable is true or false. In this case, true there. If you click on it and the variable is in a false state, it'll put the button in this other state. And then at the end of that trigger, menu there is a toggle variable trigger that's just going to flip the variable to whatever is needed to, change the button next time. Don't do time stuff by default. Assistive technologies take a little bit more time to make their way through environments. So timers often just make things hectic for assistive technology users, and they can't do things in the timed quantity. But you can provide optional timers for folks. So I will very often provide one timer that folks who really want to challenge themselves can use. So the equivalent here would be that 5-minute timer. And then, because sometimes assistive technology users like to be challenged by a timer also, you could provide kind of a more expanded or a longer timeline, like that 10-minute one, to give them a chance to do something timed. Or what I've also done is do built-in timers within a slide where you just use variables that are adding 0.1 to some numerical variable, and so folks can see a timer within the slide and they can time themselves. And then last slide of notes here, obviously don't do anything necessitating mouse control and or vision. So drag and drop, as most people know, you can't do those because, if you have to have ability to use a mouse or the ability to see things in order to do an interaction, it's not going to be accessible. So drag and drops, instead of doing those, you can do the matching drop-down interaction type within Storyline, which I tested recently. And it's the exact drop list accessibility screen reader behavior that they'd expect. And it was really great to see that after these many years. I also do a lot of selection-based drop stuff where you select the drop object and then you select the drag object and then you select the drop location. So that's that top left screenshot there. You can see we've got color and both shape coding there, just in case anybody's got a colorblind issue and can't see those colors. The built-in Likert interactions, the last time I tested those could not be done with keyboard navigation. So at least you wouldn't want to do a Likert interaction. Don't do the built-in one. You could create your own. And there used to be this built-in hotspot interaction that they've removed that also required mouse control and vision. And then lastly, shapes with solid fill, 100% transparency and no line color. They're invisible, but folks can still click on them. Assistive technologies can still engage with them if they're visible to accessibility tools. So that's just something I do a ton to facilitate accessibility related stuff. All right, that's all I had prepped for you, and I think I just perfectly used the time. Thank you all for joining me. Yeah, so as Lisa is saying there, that might be a different sort of interaction, but hotspots themselves used to be inaccessible, but they got made accessible, I think, with the accessible player. And then I was looking for that hotspot interaction in advance of this, and I didn't see it, but maybe Lisa can point that out for us. And yeah, as somebody's pointing out, hover is inaccessible. Also, hover is not going to work for mobile device users, so that's another reason not to use it. But yeah, hotspots are accessible now.
Hey, Doug, I have one more question here. Maybe we can maybe just quickly get this one. Some of our departments require us to block users from clicking things out of order. Is this inaccessible?
Block users from clicking things out of order. No, I think it'd be more of a UX question if that's, the user experience that you want for folks. But if that's the user experience for everybody, I wouldn't say that's an accessibility issue, although that's the sort of thing where you do just really make sure you're testing that with assistive technologies, because that's something that I've found that, you do think that you're blocking it for one audience, and there's something about the setup that it's not blocked from all audiences. So.
Great. Thank you. All right. Well, Doug, thanks again. What a fantastic session.
Oh, actually, let me provide another better answer for that. If there is something that happens based on a certain timing or sequence, and it's visible to sighted users that they can see that is the case really easily, just provide that same sort of notification for screen reader users. So like anytime I've got a course that starts with like a 5-second intro animation before you can do anything in the course, there's a little screen reader accessible thing in there saying there's a 5-second animation going on right now and you'll be able to engage once it's over. Or there is a button that's only going to appear at the very end of the slide, and then you're going to want to click it. But the checklist does have guidance for how to do stuff related to timing like that.
Excellent. Doug, people can connect with you on LinkedIn, anywhere else?
LinkedIn would probably be the best spot. I hesitated to provide my work email address, but LinkedIn is probably the better way to get a hold of me than my personal email address. So
Sure. And then you were saying, were you going to be at any conferences coming up at all?
Not the plan. There was a UC conference. That was a UC specific one I was telling you about.
Okay. All right, cool. And any other speaking opportunities that you have coming up?
We actually just last month did our UC Global Accessibility Awareness Day webinar, and I did a rich text editor accessibility session during that. And we don't have the recording available quite yet, but it should be up in a week or two. So it's a great 15-minute thing on rich text editor accessibility.
Oh, that sounds great.
And then we also have, let me pop into chat here. Word to PDF. We've got this other big accessibility resource that I built for UC. It's this comprehensive Word to PDF and PDF guide. It was written to Microsoft Office 2016, so it doesn't have an Office 365 update in there yet. But this is the exact audience that was intended for. It's not like a training resource so much as it is a resource for folks to build training around. It's just this knowledge base on Word and PDF accessibility that you can just select little pieces from that and create e-learning modules or like ILT sessions with.
Great. Doug, this is so generous of you. Thank you so much. This is wonderful stuff. This is going to keep everybody busy for a while, I think so. So excellent session. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and just close it out. Yeah. And we'll see everybody in the next one. We're going to be talking with Chrisanna about a beginner's guide to inclusion and accessibility. Kind of has more of a development sort of bent to that one as well. So only a couple more sessions left before the event wraps. So that's it. We'll see you next time.
All right. Thanks everybody.
Thanks again, Doug.
Thanks for letting me join you. Take care.
Bye-bye.